Team IB World, how you going? Isn't it crazy? I have to say, I thought, my obedience to the Lord was pretty good until I read Ezekiel, and I'm like, I'm not sure I would do this one, Lord. I love the moments of prophetic symbolism. Now, we explained prophetic symbolism last week in the dive, or last section in the dive. What prophetic symbolism is when God tells you to do something and it's on behalf of something that's happening. Have you noticed the Spirit of the Lord taking him? The Spirit of the Lord takes him here. It's like in Revelation where John is taken to different places. This prophet hears the voice of God and sees visions like no other. These accurate visions. Now, as you study Ezekiel, some scholars have actually said there's no way he could be prophesying without being in Jerusalem. He must have been in Jerusalem. Ezekiel is not in Jerusalem. He is 700 miles from Jerusalem in a place where he calls it. He says, I'm in Tel Aviv. I'm not in Jerusalem. He says, I'm not there. He says, I am actually 700 miles away, but God is showing me what's happening there. Incredible. And as you read it, you just see there's even, I think it's chapter 22 where he says, this person, I see this gate and I see this person and they're doing this, and it's actually happening. The people have gone back and gone, this prophet was getting the most accurate visions that were happening that they even doubt. They're like, no, it would have been after the fact. There's no way this prophet could be that accurate. Oh my gosh, God is so incredible. So, have you noticed the structure of the book? It's a very simple structure. Chapter 1 to 3, how'd you go with the eye, man? The eyes, the hands, the 4 faces. It's incredible. And then you go through and he's calling is chapter 2. And then you get this heart and then it's got this sound of judgment on Jerusalem. Have you felt that? He's cranky. Remember, we're at the pinnacle moment where Jerusalem is about to fall. We're at this moment where it's all happening. So it's hot, it's white hot, it's happening at the moment, and God is saying, this is it, I'm done. And we've got that Ezekiel's prophesying of judgment. Then have you noticed in chapter 25 he goes and talks about the surrounding nations. Now this section isn't in chronological order because it jumps around a bit. But from 25 to 32 he says, the judgment against this nation, the judgment against this nation, the judgment against this nation. And did you notice in that section where he does the judgment against the king of Tyre, Tyre? Do you remember that? And as you're reading it, like there's more to this than just a king judgment on a king. And that's actually the judgment against Satan. And it parallels that. It's really quite incredible. So as you go through, you are going to have the climax of the book in chapters 32 where Jerusalem falls and the city falls. And you've got this moment, this incredible moment where this guy comes to Ezekiel and God says to him, a guy's about to come and tell you that Jerusalem's fallen. And he does. And a guy comes to him and says, yep, Jerusalem's fallen. And we've got this pinnacle moment where Jerusalem has fallen. And then we go through from 33 to 37 and it goes to a book of hope. I love that these prophetic voices always end in this beautiful hope. 33 to 37, God talks about the remnant. And he says, no, I am going to actually restore Jerusalem. I am actually going to restore Israel. I am actually going to restore the temple. And he has this incredible vision. And this is where we get the dry bones and the temple vision of the river. We get this incredible, Ezekiel has so much gold in it. Spend time in these visions where you're just in the imagination of God. Sometimes we need to stop the movies, stop the television, and just be in the imagination of God, because he is far greater than any television show on earth. Seriously, it's quite incredible. Now, how you're going with all the beautiful prophetic imagery. And as you go through this book, notice that we've got warnings and judgment, and then encouragement and hope. Now, let me just explain some themes as you go through. Supernatural heavenly beings. You are going to encounter some things that are going above your brain. Notice the glory of the Lord. The glory of the Lord in the Old Testament is the Shekinah glory, the presence of God. The glory of the Lord resided in the temple. And that is the presence of Yahweh. And that is the presence of God in this place. And he falls down every time. I love it. He's like, I saw the glory of the Lord. And that's a reaction to the glory of the Lord. He falls over every time he's in God's presence. Can I say, as I'm reading this prophet who knows the holiness of God, God speaks to him clearly. And as I'm going through this book and I'm getting the understanding of the nature of the grandeur of God and the grandeur of God's imagination, this is the same God that I have in my life. This is the same God that when I worship, his presence comes in. And I take that for granted, that this prophet has the same encounter with the same God, the grandeur and the holiness of God. Never forget that the God that you pray to is this amazing, creative, magnificent God. He's not a small best friend. He is magnificent and almighty. So that keeps reminding me. Now, God's holiness in his temple, the Spirit, you hear this beautiful Holy Spirit. I'm going to talk about in the dive this week, the Trinitarian nature of this text. The man that turns up every now and then is this man Jesus, the glory of God that comes in, and the Spirit that shows him all. I feel like I'm in Revelations as I'm reading this book, and Revelations is one of my favorite books, but I have to say Ezekiel is pretty close. It's this prophetic element which I absolutely love. You've got the promise of Israel. In the end, you've got this beautiful understanding, and I love this, of an undivided heart and spirit. It kind of points forward to the New Testament way that he wanted a people that had an undivided heart. We've got the repeated term, the word of the Lord, the word of the Lord. There's so much in this. But I just want to do 3 things before I finish. Number 1, did you notice back in the beginning where God calls Ezekiel? He says to Ezekiel, you will be struck dumb, mute, and you will only be able to speak the word of the Lord, right? Then as you go through, I'm noticing, I'm reading this, and then as I go through, I notice in I think it's chapter 24, where something happens and he says, it's chapter 24, can I read it to you? And he says, I'm in 28, I'm in 26. On that day, a fugitive will come to tell you the news. So this is where the Jerusalem has fallen. And he says, it's about to happen. Ezekiel's wife has just passed away, heartbreaking moment in chapter 24. And he says, on that day, someone will come and tell you the bad news. At that time, your mouth will be opened. You will speak with him and will no longer be silent. Wait a second. Do you mean to say that Ezekiel has been silent the whole 24 chapters? But wait, there's more. Then as I kept reading, I keep going through. This is why reading the Bible, as the Bible was intended, as a whole book, is amazing. Then I realized in chapter 33, the prophecy of 24, where he says someone's going to come and tell you, and at that moment you will be able to speak. We get to chapter 33 and he says, 33:22, now the evening before the man arrived, the hand of the Lord was on me, and he opened my mouth before the man came to me in the morning. So my mouth was opened and I was no longer silent. I studied this, I read commentaries, because I'm like, wait a second. Seriously, Ezekiel was struck dumb. He wasn't allowed to speak anything but prophecies in that whole time. Oh, man. And as I'm reading in the scholars are like, we don't know. We do not know if he was struck dumb, silent, and was only allowed to prophesy. We don't know what that looked like. But there's these beautiful bits in the Bible, these gems that you just go, wait a second, what was that? The other thing I love about this text is this understanding of Son of Man, prophesy. Time and time again, he says, Son of Man, prophesy. Son of Man, prophesy. And it's this Son of Man standing up and speaking to a situation. Can I say to you, TYB, if stuff's happening around your life, Son of Man or Son of Woman, prophesy. Women prophesy, men prophesy, do the thing that God is calling, speak the word that God is calling you to speak. Because as Ezekiel gets this prophecy in his mouth, so cool. He changes situations around him and God speaks through him. So I got stirred in my heart for that. Now, as we go through, you're going to end on this beautiful temple, and I cannot help but just feel the presence of God as I read the end of this book. The temple of the Lord. I mean, I loved going through the Valley of Dry Bones. We all love that chapter, and I loved going through but when you hit the temple of the Lord, and he's talking about New Jerusalem, he's talking about at the end, where the temple of the Lord. And what will that look like? Because in Revelation it says there's no temple. It will be the temple of God filling the earth, and his throne, encaptured on his throne, and the river of God with the healing for the nations. Get lost in the imagery of this beautiful text as Ezekiel prophesies to you and prophesies. It's passionate, it's eccentric, it's a little weird, but you're going to love it. Finish the journey strong and do these 48 chapters and really fall in love with this prophet with a commitment and a burden of the Lord to prophesy in a time that was just amazing, and time of fall of Jerusalem, as well as the prophecy and the visions of the future. Have a great time as you finish the book of Ezekiel.